Yay! This is going to be Tuesday, March 27th, my advanced class. We just figured out that the Hobbison's in the day. What an exciting day for her. Tomorrow you get your camp info for camp, as opposed to not for camp, unless you're missing stuff for me or Randall or Melling, or if you've irritated me, then I lose your stuff. Worst case scenario, you find out on Thursday at the very end of the day. Spirit Week, tomorrow is Decades Day. Most of you are going to probably dress like a hippie. Or for some of you, you could dress like a greaser from the 1950s. That's pretty easy to do too. Just as far as rolling up the pack of cigarettes in your sleeve, make good choices. Menthols, think of the future. And then the book drive, menthols are like diet cigarettes for those of you who aren't up on your cigarettes. Just trying to help you out. That's my gift to you.
Why are you telling us this?
Because I care about children.
You didn't give me information. Why would you tell us that they're diet cigarettes? How about don't smoke, kids?
Well, I mean, I know you're all going to smoke.
What's
Smoke
a diet cigarette?
Book drive for B points. You can bring in the books to donate, and then each book you donate gets you a point. And then the not touching the books is not, ooh, those of you who are at home, you're missing out on the fact that we got our own books. I have a shiny book for you here. You can come in and get your book. There's also, we're going to find out in a moment, an ebook version, which you can go on there and read too. If you want to read that, you can go download it, and it goes into iBooks, and it has all the little ready bits to try and help you out from there. And then the reason that you guys don't get to keep these books, and the reason it's not a class set, is that the next book we read, The Princess Bride, that is the class set you do get to keep, and it used to be the other way around, where the kids got to keep this one, and we only have like a certain set of The Princess Bride, but The Princess Bride was like a much bigger, better book, and so that's the one you're going to want to keep of the two of them, so we ended up flip-flopping back and forth. So now I only have the class set of these, but we get to have your unlimited numbers of The Princess Bride you get to keep on your own. The joy of learning. Yes, Gaff.
Are we gonna read the movie? Are we gonna watch the movie?
Which movie?
The Princess Bride.
No. Well, technically you have a choice. At the end of the year, that last week, we get to either watch The Princess Bride, or I tell you stories about my childhood. And so, once again, I'm happy either way. It's just up to you guys. Although I will say the last 3 years, HTC Movie Theater, they do like on Sundays and Wednesdays, they do like classic movies. And so far for the last 3 years, Princess Bride has always played in June. So I send out like a reminder to all my advanced kids. I'm like, hey, come watch the movie. And I go hang out with a bunch of kids and watch the movie in an actual movie theater. Fingers crossed we get to do it again and that they don't hate you. But if they do hate you, I don't hate you as much. Sandy.
Why can't we have both class sets?
Because apparently people complain and don't want to spend money.
Yeah. But wouldn't the Princess Bride be more expensive being better and bigger and stuff?
Got me?
Yeah, that's exactly
Write a letter to your congressman.
that one.
I mean, I don't know about what, but just to say hi.
Exactly what we're
Hold him!
Am I doing this correctly?
Yeah, that was an interesting sound, so sure. We're going to start not on page 1, but on page VII,
Wow.
which is like page 1, but spelled differently. No, it's Vi, which is different than Vi, which comes right before it, and Vi, which comes after it. So we're going to get into it. It says, a note to the readers, because this book, as I told you before, is historical fiction. We're going to find out why, which is, by the way, weird for me to think about this being historical fiction, because it came out like, was events that happened like after I started teaching, which for me should not be history. It should be like current times, but then I realized that's years before you were born, and then I started feeling old, and then I cried. Anyway, Mullins.
So for the what's it called, the Decades Day for Spirit Week, what if I dressed up as like the windows, like the old Windows thing?
That'd be hilarious. A note to the readers. While I was waiting in line at the local grocery store, a young man approached me and asked me for the time. I told him 4:10. I remember it distinctly, and continued emptying my carriage onto the conveyor belt. Carriage is British slang for shopping cart. I have no idea why she says that, because she's not British, nor is this taking place in England. And it's like the only place in the book she all of a sudden goes all Britishy, but that's what it is. So people are weird.
Maybe the author was British.
She's not. That's the problem. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. Neither the kid who wrote the book, nor the author, nor the location. Like, none of it is. And in a moment she goes on to calling it a cart. It's just humans are strange. That's the only thing I have for you. He hovered around the store's exit and approached me again as I left. He held a copy of my first novel, True Confessions. Aren't you a writer? I told him I was. I've got a great story for you. Oh yeah? I pushed the shopping cart toward my car. You know who the best person to tell your story is? He shook his head. You. He smiled and then offered me a bundle of typed pages held together with twine. It looked like a thesis, but smelled like the bottom of the earth. I didn't take it. There are lots of great publishing houses out there. I started in New York. You can always go the agent route, too. I finished loading the groceries into my car, then gave him my best nice to meet you smile. You don't understand. I'm not even supposed to be here. I closed the trunk and looked at him. Blonde hair, half grown out into its natural brown, serious eyes, slight build, peaceful smile. 17, 18 years old. He looked vaguely familiar. This has to get published. He pressed the papers into my hand. I don't know what else to do. He stood on one leg, the other one bent and tucked against it. It was a yoga position my son and I practiced all the time. Tree pose? I asked. He nodded. I'm trying to stay balanced. Pfft, aren't we all? Those of you unfamiliar with yoga, the tree pose, we have one leg down and then your other leg comes up and goes against your knee like that. And normally you can try to do like a little thing. You go above yourself like that or try to make like a little tree thing. I only know this because my kids grew up with the Nintendo Wii, and they have like a little yoga thing you can do for the Nintendo Wii on the balance board. They're all kinds of fun. So that's, all right, not that one. There you go, tree pose, to sort of help you figure out. That's what he does while talking to her. He just suddenly strikes a tree pose, you know, as you do. He seemed completely unself-conscious. I just came back from Walden Pond. Have you been there? Many times. He pulled the paperback Walden from his back pocket, there's a copy of the book, and started to read. To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. He looked at me, eyes shining. Isn't that the best? What do you say to a kid standing on one leg while quoting Thoreau? I told him I'd read his manuscript. I set it up like a term paper. I typed it on an old manual typewriter in the woods, and then I pulled stuff from the web, added some biblical quotes. He smiled. It'll all make sense, you'll see. He placed his foot firmly on the ground. If you decide not to help me, I'll understand. I asked how I should contact him. That's impossible. I'll contact you. On the drive home, I skimmed through the pages on my lap. I sat in my driveway and continued to read, unfazed by the gallon of ice cream melting in my trunk. I had thought he looked familiar. I raced back to the grocery store to find him, but he'd already gone. By the time he called the next day, I had read his entire manuscript. Well, he asked. His anticipation reminded me so much of my own, waiting to get my own first novel published. I told him I had another project I was working on, but thought his version of this story was important and needed to be told. I asked my editor, Christy, if she'd be interested in publishing the manuscript. After reading it, she was. Josh also gave me a disc with photos he'd taken. We placed them throughout the book. The epilogue was my idea to add another perspective. Working on the book, I sometimes found Josh's story inspirational. Other times it seemed eerie and devoid of meaning. In my research, I found some people who said Josh suffered from bipolar disorder, or ADHD. One teacher even said he thought Josh had an acute messiah complex. All I know is the young man I met several times over the course of a month seemed perfectly normal. Don't go by me. I sit in a room and make up stories all day. When my editor mailed me the galleys a few months ago, I talked to Josh for the last time. You realize if we publish this, people are going to know that you're still alive, I said. The whole mess might start up again. His voice sounded calm and rational. It's really important for me to be honest right now. I want to write about the truth. I tried to reach him later to give him some copies of the book, but he disappeared. Again, this is his story. Janet Tasjian. A couple things before you get a chance to get to the actual book. Do you guys know what a messiah complex is? They mentioned it in there. Do you guys know what a messiah is?
Yes.
Messiah is? Braden?
Messiah is the person, it's a religious person that comes to save the world.
There you go. It's supposed to be the idea of the embodiment of God in a human. A Messiah complex is where a person feels they are the embodiment of God in a person. Where the idea, doctors often are said to have a Messiah complex, because the idea that they can heal people. Like, you were dying, and I put my hand inside your heart, and ka-thunk, 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 and you came back to life. I am God! And so that's where they get a Messiah complex, because they bring people back to life, which only the big guy or girl or turtle believes in. And so it's that same idea. A lot of people said that about Josh, the fact that he had a Messiah complex. Why? Well, you're going to figure out. That's where the story comes in.
What is an acute Messiah
With the
complex?
book coming into it, what we're going to sort of figure out is the book is written not by Janet, but by Josh. But he sort of uses her fame because she was a known author at the time, and he was not, and because of the events that happened, and so he's trying to sort of bring himself back in because the whole world thought he was dead because of this event. It was sort of his way of easing himself back into everything. So it's using her name as the author, but this other guy, Josh Swinson, is sort of like an autobiography where he's telling you about these events that happened to him. Yes.
What's an acute Messiah complex?
An acute just means, well, focused, like an acute triangle. So the idea is that it's supposed to like a general or broad. I've usually just heard it called a Messiah complex. An acute one, I don't know as much about that one. It's just a way of saying it's a really focused. Which is weird because he's not saving people, but he did try to save the world with what he did. So it's kind of the same idea. Anyway, The Gospel According to Larry. My Own Words by Josh Swinson. Oh, the book doesn't have chapters. It has parts. There's like 6 or 7 parts to the book. Now, there are chapters. They're just not chapter numbers. Like if you turn to page, I think 15, you'll see that there's obviously a new chapter beginning, but there's no chapter numbers. It just stops and separates as you go through it, which makes it really confusing as we go through and read it, but that's why you're smart to try and be able to figure these things out. I wish you luck on that smart part. Part 1. This is the disciple which testifieth of these things, and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. St. John 21:24. I have not enjoyed a rant this much since Thoreau, Beth said. And the book has lots of footnotes, you'll see at the bottom. Henry David Thoreau wrote Walden and Civil Disobedience, the 2 books I put behind me. We had to read them for English last semester. Very New England. Nature is good. Materialism is bad. Anyway, Beth ate it up with a spoon. All right, do you guys know what materialism is?
Yeah, it's like obsessed over having.
Like new technology?
Is what?
It's like being obsessed with having like a bunch of like
Yeah.
items and stuff.
Materialism is where all you do is care about having stuff, materials and things, where that's the thing that makes you, the more stuff you have, the happier you are. Madonna had a song in the 80s called Material Girl. I'm a material girl.
I know it.
Great song. Anyway, it was all about the fact that if you want my love, you give me stuff. If you don't give me stuff, you get no love.
That's not
And so
shallow.
that was the idea. Shallow, that's people who have like emotions. Material is all about giving me stuff. And so this guy was all about giving your stuff away, living in the woods, hugging raccoons and stuff like that. And so the complete opposite of materialism, communing with nature, stuff like, crazy people talk. Everyone knows that the more stuff you have, the better off you are.
Yep.
We need people stirring up the way we think about things. My best friend Beth was trying to talk me into forming a Larry study group with her. His website, www.thegospelaccordingtolarry.com, received hundreds of hits a day, mostly from teens and college students. No one knew Larry's identity, and that conjecture alone was the source of several companion websites. Many kids at school were fans, but Beth was rabid. Josh, I know neither one of us has ever joined a club in our life, but that's precisely why we should. I tried to listen to the details of her story. I really did. But there's something about Beth's mouth that gets in the way of paying attention to its contents. She would hate me for saying this with her "don't objectify me" rant. Protest all you want, Beth. It's the truth. She often wore a certain brown lipstick and outlined the edges of her lips with this pencil she carried in her bag. Every time she talked, it was like this pale chocolate snow cone staring up at me, waiting to be eaten. I've been in love with her since 6th grade. She didn't have a clue. I'll help you at the club, I said. But just so the two of us can bag all the meetings and laugh at the other people who show up. She was not amused. This isn't a joke. Someone is finally talking about the things I've been saying all along. And I think it's important to help spread the word. Are you in or are you out? Of course I'm in. I can't let you do this on your own. Next thing I know, you'll be running for prom queen or something. She punched me in the arm, her usual form of affection. Hey, why don't you help me at the store this afternoon? We're having a run on shovels. Beth's father's hardware store had been our work/treehouse/summer camp since grammar school. Sorting the nuts and bolts, counting the different light bulbs, shoveling the wood chips into wheelbarrows had never seemed like a job to either of us. The small store prided itself on carrying everything a homeowner could need. But for a loner like me, it was a non-threatening way to be a part of the community, without too much social pressure. I told Beth I'd meet her there, at 4. For a brief moment, I pretended we were a couple, not snowbound outside Boston, but romping through the Caribbean surf, tan, in love. My fantasy shattered, however, when she waved goodbye and headed across the cafeteria to Todd Terrific, a new jock she was obsessed with. Can someone please explain to me how this preoccupation with dopey athletes happens even to headstrong young women who work in hardware stores and score 1350s on their SATs? Beth, what are you doing to me? Life was cruel and unfair. What did this Larry guy have to say about that? The rest of school went by like the movie Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray wakes up and every day is the same. If you've never seen Groundhog Day, by the way, 1, shame on you. 2, shame on your parents. It is an absolutely wonderful movie. Down to the last boring details. Even when something new did happen, fire drill, substitute teacher, it was still just a giant yawn in the storyline. To keep myself amused during study hall, I invented a new alphabet based on the sense of smell. Footnote. Okay, I also wrote a skit for Monty Python in case they ever wanted to reunite, and then I drew sketches for the Gumby art project I was working on. Got to keep busy, I always say. Again, if you're unfamiliar with Monty Python, again, shame on you and shame on your parents. Monty Python is where basically all humor comes from. It is one of the greatest things you can find. Yes, it's on YouTube. Yes, once you start watching them, you consider yourself losing several hours to it. And then Gumby, which is just awesome. If you haven't picked up on it, Josh is a little odd. He's a different sort of fellow, but he's adorable. At home that night, I booted up my laptop and logged on. I checked my email, then the small portfolio of stocks my mother left me when she died. I made one last online stop to Larry. I wondered if Beth was doing the same thing at the same time, an unrequited cyberdate. The Larry logo filled the screen. It was a peace sign with a dove, a floppy disk, a planet, and a plug inside each of its 4 sections. Looks like that. There's also one at the very beginning of the book, like on the 2nd page, but I figure it's easier to look up there. I scrolled down through several photographs to comments people had written that day. Pole John posted a new link to Adbusters. Toe Jam ranted about Larry's last sermon, calling it brilliantly flawed. I was in the middle of reading his argument when Peter knocked quickly, then stuck his head in my room. You want some leftover pizza? My stepfather was the ultimate businessman. Even in his terry cloth robe and slippers with the squashed heels, he could command his advertising consulting firm from the brink of failure to unbridled success. He had the whole sales thing down. The firm handshake, the warm smile, the good listening. It was the real Peter, not a put-on, like lots of other guys at this company. He looked over my shoulder and checked out the screen. I've heard about this, Larry. Some guy bashing our culture online? Pfft, anonymous coward. Some people think it's one of the big televangelists trying to reach the teen market. Or maybe it's a bored housewife in the suburbs looking for something to do. Peter shook his head. Probably some hacker trying to make a name for himself. I'll add that to the list of hypotheses, I said. You do that. He handed me a slice of pizza on a paper towel. Dinner at Catherine's tomorrow? That okay with you? Sure, that's great. Catherine was my stepfather's girlfriend, who'd been putting on the full court press with the next Mrs. Swinson. I didn't have the nerve to tell Peter I found her as interesting as a bag of rice. Peter closed the door and headed downstairs to his office. I browsed the Larry archives and printed out the latest sermon to prepare for Beth tomorrow. All right, a little confusing with his family because he's talking about his stepdad and his stepdad's girlfriend. You're like, what about the mom? He grew up with mom and dad. Dad left when he was a kid. This tells us a little later on. Dad just left him because sometimes dads make poor choices. He then grows up with just mom. Mom starts dating Peter, the stepdad. Soon after her and Peter get together, mom dies of cancer. Life. Once mom dies, dad's gone, stepdad then adopts him, and then he becomes live with stepdad. So that's why it's him and stepdad, and now stepdad is now dating a new girl, which is a girlfriend. If that confuses you, welcome to life. That's just sort of how these things go. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to get into the next part. The sermon that we see coming up is what happens on the gospel website. Is Larry posts all these rants where basically it's like he goes out there, it's like an editorial where he attacks something. And so we'll get into this attack he does tomorrow about the idea of materialism and how stupid materialism is and how dumb kids are because they buy into it so easily and fun stuff like that. But that will be for tomorrow. Your homework, as it was back with Outsiders, is to not read. Just bring the book back tomorrow. Well, if you think this is tough, wait till we get to the good part of the book. Because then your homework gets really challenging, because then your homework is to not read over spring break, which gets really awful.